Okay, hi, welcome to this tutorial. Just following on from what you've seen in the seminar there, just wanted to talk a little bit about bass sounds and different ways in which you can process your bass sounds. You know, Reason's got a very good options for routing, ways that you can send different sounds around, and it's very flexible and very fast to do. Once you've done it a couple of times, it's very, very quick process to do and very intuitive. So I really recommend getting into splitting bass sounds inside of Reason if that's what you use, because it will give you a really good effect. Also, if you don't use Reason, this principle is applied to all other softwares as well. So in terms of how you basically split the signal into different sections and then process those different sections differently. So all will become clear about what I'm talking about there. So just as an example, I've just chosen this track which I'm working on at the moment because I've done this technique in it, and it's sounding pretty good. It's not finished yet, but it's the principle that I want to explain to you. So if you just check out the bass line here, we'll just leave this one play and just have a quick listen to the bass. And this is made up of several layers, and I'll just go in and quickly break down those layers in a second. So yeah, this one's called Energy Index. Check this out. Okay, so as you can hear, this got quite well. The bass line pretty much dominates the track, and yeah, that's made of several layers. So what I do is I just split that down so you can just hear the different layers now, one by one. So I've got them combined inside this combinator here. So we can look at it here, and they're split. I'm going to look at exactly how this is done, but just so you get a rough idea of how these bass sounds are made up. Can have a quick look. So let's just solo the subtractor, and what you can hear there is several layers. So we've got one sound, so this is one source taken from a subtractor split into several areas. So we've got this sub layer, which is just a heavy sub that sits underneath of it, and then we've got this kind of wide reverby distorted mid-range layer. Got more of a sort of harsher phased version of that, so that's got a phaser on it as well as distortion. And then we've got this other layer, which is really heavily distorted, a bit of reverb as well, a bit gritty. So all together, you can hear there that there's quite a lot of, a lot of presence and a lot of weight due to those layers. So it started off with just one sound, and it's kind of how I've gone on and processed that. So I'm going to pick up this patch actually. So I'm going to use the same patch, and I'm just going to go over and just have another quick go at how that's been processed, so you can see there. So I'm just going to save that to the desktop as a Resonant Square, and we're going to open this patch up in a new project, and hopefully that should show you how to process your bass lines. So let's just shut this down a minute. Okay, so starting in a blank template now. So I'm going to start off by creating a mixer, as we do. And I'm going to then create a subtractor. And just for the ease of this example, I'm going to load up the Resonant Square, which we've got set up in the project. So it's just basically a square wave with some modulation going onto it. So this isn't really a tutorial in synthesis, so I'm going to look just more about the routing options for the processing of the sound. So we've got this kind of quite nice So I'm just going to open the envelope slightly there. You can see on the amount, which, not that much, but just enough to, and then bring the decay up a bit. So we've got like a really subby patch that's got a lot of low end in it, but it also has a lot of mid-range to it as well. So that's the idea with this, is that you've got a sound that's got quite a thickness to it. So a lot of sub, decent bit of mids, a little bit of top end as well, and you can really kind of work with that and get that sounding quite rich. So the idea is we take this output and we split it. So whether this be a synthesizer or a sample that you start with, doesn't really matter. It's the process that you apply afterwards. So there's many different ways you can do this in Reason. This is just one, but it's just opening up the idea to you. So first of all, I'm just going to hold down shift, because when you hold down shift, it doesn't wire the device for you. So it just generates the new device, but without wiring it. And I'm going to create the Spyder audio merger and splitter, this thing here. So if we press tab and we look around the back, you can see that it's not been wired up. Now what I do is if I take the output of the subtractor, which is a mono output, and I put it into here, essentially what this is doing is just copying it into 4 different channels. So you've got the original, and then you've got 4 identical versions of that. Same volume, same everything, same the fact they're mono and everything else comes out the back of here. So what we can do is we can then, this starts off the idea that I'm talking about, because we can have 4 different types of processing put all over these and then recombined at the end to give us that finished bass sound. So let's first of all just look at the low area that we want to focus on, because you know, if you're making dubstep or drum and bass, it's very much focused on that bass, you know, getting the bass very strong and firm. So I'm just going to generate a envelope control filter, really good for this first application of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take one copy, put it into the left input, into the mono input of the envelope filter, and I'm going to put that back into my mixer here for now. So that basically means that we've got a filtered version. So if I press the note, you can hear there that we're filtering out all the top frequencies that are in the original sound coming out the subtractor. So that's the full sound, and I'm just going to filter it back a little bit. Bit of resonance helps, because if you sit that resonance over where there's like a natural lump in the frequency, you'll get a really warm bass tone. So somewhere there, it's an F, so it's going to be around 41 hertz. So I'm going down from F to E there. Nice and deep. Okay, cool. So that's the principle behind this idea, is to filter out this low end, and then we can add richer, kind of more textured versions on the top of that. So right, so let's go to the mid-range now. So I'm going to generate a Scream 4 distortion. So I'm just loading that up into there now. And so what I can do is I can take the output of this second available output from the splitter. So the first one went into the filter and then out back to the mixer, and this one's going to come out of the splitter into the Scream, and then from the Scream back into the mixer. So if I just solo on here now and press play, you hear that we've got this gritty mid-range version. So I can try and find something that's going to warm up that middle layer. I quite like Tube, I do use it a lot. It's just got a warm sound. Sounds a bit more natural than some of these other ones. It sounds a bit more analog, so I tend to go with it. And then change these 2 parameters a little bit to taste. They're a bit arbitrary, to be honest with you, because they depend on what setting you're on. But while you're on Tube, we've got contour and bias, so you get a slightly rougher sound by kind of adjusting them. Also, I like to use the body on here as well, because you can get a really sort of fat tube sound out of it. Like, you can ease the resonance back if it's too harsh. So obviously not that much, but I like that setting anyway. It gives it some nice warmth. So we're trying to bring out the warmth and the harmonics in the mid-range. Tend to use the EQ to reduce the bass now, because we've already got bass taken care of with that sub layer, which has been filtered out using the envelope filter. So we just want to bring out the mids a little bit, maybe drop the tops a touch. So together you got lots of sub, but then you've also got a controlled mid-range with some nice distortion on. Okay, so that's basically that layer, and then I'm going to add, keep it simple today, I'm just going to put one more layer into the top range. You could go on quite a lot with this and keep adding lots of different layers in, splitting the bands up, but I'm just going to keep it nice and simple. So for that I'm going to generate another type of scream, okay, and I'm going to wire that through. So I'm going to come out of here again into the scream, and then put the scream back into channel 3, so that we've got this kind of nice collection of sounds now. So if we listen to this on its own, I want something really gritty, really grimy for that top range. So let's have a look. Fuzz is quite nice. So once again, I'm going to cut out this. I might up the presence a bit actually, which we've got here. So makes it slightly brighter. Same with the tone. So I'm going to pull that down, pull the mids and the top. Again, a bit of body, which is helping to grit. So the original would be, and we've turned it into, so it's quite full-on sound, but blended with the others, which hope you have to mix these. So we got our sub, mids, so we've got a few notes we can mess about with there, but the important thing is we've got control over all these layers now. So for a bass sound, that's quite well developed, considering it was originally just a sort of basic envelope controlled wave. Right, so we're not done here yet. I'm just going to turn that up a little bit as well, so you can hear it a little bit better. Okay, cool. So we can hear all the range. Now, what we want to do is put on a bit of reverb onto these sounds, because reverb helps to fill the frequencies out a little bit more, stops it from sounding too hollow, and makes it sound a bit more natural, because it sounds like it's in a space. So don't be afraid to put reverb onto bass sounds. People think, oh, you shouldn't reverb bass. Well, you shouldn't reverb low bass like this stuff. Don't put it on that, because it causes all manner of problems. But the higher end, so technically it's not bass, but it's the layers that make up the bass, stuff like this. And this, reverbing this stuff works really, really nicely. So for example, if I put on RV7 onto here, we've got even just with this, the simple patch, it's got a much nicer tone to it. So you can choose different ones. Like I'd use this Space Echo quite a lot. Again, it's an imitation one, but just gives you that nice sort of tail on sounds, and when that's bouncing around on the top of your bass, it can sound quite good. I'm just going to pull the decay back a little bit so it's not too long. So it fades out quite quickly, but just helps give a bit more sort of interest to the bass, really. So let's see how that sounds. Pretty good. We could add a different type of reverb to the top as well and put that into a slight space. Just a simple reverb maybe. So listen to that on its own. Oh, wrong one. There we go, that one. Try some different types of settings. So we could go for, got a cool sort of stereo echo. Again, we'll pull the decay down a little bit. See how that sounds? Sounds nice. Great, so that's the principle behind doing this processing, is to split the bands up and give them a bit of space, a little bit of stereo effect if you can, because it was originally a mono signal. So by putting some effects like this type of thing, really simple stereo effects on the top end, helps to give your bass that nice width at the top. There's some more advanced techniques you can apply this idea with, like applying delays, and we'll probably look at that in further tutorials, but for the scope of this one, that's enough to be looking at there. So just something which is going to add some width and a bit of interest to the top. What I tend to try and do as well is cut the lows out of the sounds of the mid-range, so they're definitely not going to conflict with the bass. So I normally put an EQ after the reverb, which is on that middle band, and I can drop this back now and just use a parametric and a shelf EQ that's just going to make double sure that there's not going to be bass frequencies leaking through. I mean, as you can see, I've dropped the EQ here, but that doesn't give you a total cut. So this will help to add to that. So those two added together will subtract the full amount, and hopefully there'll be no bass leaking through there then. So that should give us a nice clean sound. So the sub's sitting on its own. We just minimize all this stuff. So we can hear this here, that we've got sub, a bit more mids, and then a bit more mid-range to it. Cool. Those delays, the delay that's on the space echo there can be a problem, especially because you hear there when you're moving between notes, we've got kind of getting the tail end of the bass switching around. So I think I might go back in and swap that for something without some delay on it. I mean, it's all right for long notes that are just on their own, but when you're playing through notes, in different notes in the scale, that delay can end up confusing things a little bit. So I'm just going to try and find something that's a bit more spacey. So something like a spring, like, you know, like a, that's quite nice. So if we just hear that on its own, we've got more of a springy reverb, and we can pull the decay down even more as well. So it only really reverbs for like half a second after the sound, so. Sounding good. Okay, so we've got a lot more texture to the bass, and most importantly, we've got full control. We can up the sub, we can down the tops, whatever, we can balance it. It's going to sound good. The other thing is portamento on bass, which is great. If we up this, we kind of, the way it slides between notes is, sounds quite good, gives it a sort of pitch bend effect. But anyway, we're just focusing on one bass note with a layer at the moment. So that's our basic patch, right? Things that you could also do to develop this further would be to, well, we'd want to compress the sort of sub end of this bass a little bit, so that the actual low end frequency between, like, you know, 30 and 65, 70 hertz is nicely compressed. So quite often you can just click over the device and create a compressor that's just compressing that sub range. So there's many people who, I'm not going to go too far into ratios now, just showing you the idea that you should compress the sub to make it a bit more solid. But I'd sort of try something like 3:1, fairly sort of long release, about 200-300, and the attack, again, just, I don't have it so quick because sometimes that gives you clicks if you have it right down here, but you know, quick enough to sort of catch the beginning part of the bass anyway. And then we'll just pull the threshold down slowly until we're getting pretty consistent level of compression. So yeah, something like 3 or 4 dBs. So when the note first jumps on, you get that. See the compressor just sort of jumps into place, and that's just leveling out the bass. So it means that on all the notes we play, if we were going to play a few, you can see the compressors jumping around and sitting everything in line with each other. So all our bass notes should be quite nice and level. Because it's compressed, you can put a bit of makeup gain if you want, but it doesn't really make any difference because you're essentially going to be controlling the volume with the fader here. So, point is, we've leveled the notes amongst themselves though. So, this is the basic premise. I mean, it takes a lot more processing this to get it sounding ready for a finished track. but this is the point where you want to get to, and you can start developing this yourself. So you can then take this idea and you can EQ sort of like a bit more into the low end if you want, or take, you know, find a frequency that you like. For example, in this mid-range, I could use the EQ to get a bit creative and bring out a bit more of a vowely sound in it, which gives us that sort of, you know, gives us a bit more crunch to the bass. So you can go on and on and on and start to develop this sound and this idea a lot more. You can then apply automation, you know, think like, don't be afraid of like automating sounds. So getting this to move like, you know, effects like that, which are going to give your bass a lot more interest, you know, just by automating things around. So that's the basic principle. Split your sound up, start to apply some processing to it, and you should get something that sounds a bit more unique and a bit fuller quite quickly. What I like to do as well is combine all of these things to a slightly better effect, including this mixer, because this is going to be part of the combinator. So I'm going to basically get all of this stuff and put it inside a combinator. And the way I do that is I just create the combinator and I just use it as a sheath. So I just select all the things that I want to put inside it by holding down Shift and then drag them inside the device. So you can see that it hasn't done any wiring for us because that's not what I wanted. I just literally want it as a container. I'm going to replace the mixer at the top and put a new mixer and add it here. So we can, let's have a go around the front a minute. For some reason it's not letting me want to change the name of that mixer. But anyway, that's going to be our bass mixer, and this will be our essentially our main mixer at the top here. So yeah, that's the idea, and there you have it. A bit more of a solid bass sound. And then finally, if you wanted to, you could throw all of that through for something like a low pass filter, which would give us, again, more automation and more movement. So we could essentially take the output of our bass mix, because this is our low, mids, tops, inside our combinator, take the main output of that, put it into the low pass filter, for example, put that back into channel 1 of our main mix, apply that back to our big channel there. So now we've got, not only have we got the envelope moving around on the filter inside the bass, but we've also got like a group filter, which is this one. Which we can do all sorts of things with as well. And it's just more control, a bigger element of control, and that's what good bass line's all about, is one that sounds nice and sculpted and controlled and in level. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. Back to the seminar now, where we'll be looking at some more ideas for your productions. Catch you soon.